Good afternoon. My name is Ken Catanella, and I'm here to talk a little bit about not only what it means to be an entrepreneur, but what it means to be faced with some of the things that we do and live with all the time in your daily lives. An entrepreneur in my world is a little bit different. A stockbroker, which is what I am, is a self-starter if he wants to be successful. And for the most part, the most important attribute, I think, of being anything is he's somebody who's positive. He never thinks he has a bad day. He always tries to take that, learn from that, and move forward. An entrepreneur, as far as a stockbroker, being a self-starter to his clients, is more than just somebody who picks stocks or recommends investments. Sometimes he's a pastor, sometimes he's a psychologist, sometimes he's a psychiatrist, sometimes he's just there to hold hands and calm the patient down, okay, and give the client more information so he can help him not make emotional decisions. Sometimes he's involved in family matters. So it's an all-around aspect of the person's total being, not just his total net worth. I started about 25 years ago in the 80s. I would have said the 80s, by the way. I thought that was a cooler period than the 90s. And when I started, I remember my first day, I started with 50 cents in my pocket, and that's about it, with the idea that I could do as much business as I wanted to within the guidelines of the firm by just studying hard, working late, and making lots of phone calls. And that's how I started, and that's how most stockbrokers start. The key difference is that some stockbrokers, or beginning brokers, work very, very hard and long. Others work smart. And it's those brokers that work smart that usually do the best for themselves and their clients. And that's the most important thing, because if your client does well, then obviously you do well. If the product you sell does well, then obviously you do well. If we do the right thing up front for the client, and we make the right recommendations, and we explain everything that we have to, then you have a client sometimes for life. And that's what we look for. We don't look to work to get a client, we look to keep a relationship with the client. Being a broker is about entrepreneurship, but it's also being about a people person. I mean, you have to understand who you're dealing with. In fact, it's one of the most important rules of how we deal. You have to know that person. You have to make sure that he understands what he's doing too. Although you're here in this environment, you may or may not know what's happened out there for the past 12 months. In a way, I'm glad some of you don't know what's going on. Just like my sons, when they were in school. They didn't know what was going on. Sometimes you do want to know, though, because it will affect your next life. In fact, what's going on right now is something that's never happened in this country since the 30s. We're in the midst of one of the most severe financial crises that this country has ever faced since the Great Depression. And that's how serious it is. If you didn't know that, sometimes that's okay. But I think you want to know more about it, because when you walk out there, this is all done, you're going to face it. So you better understand it. Started about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, back in July of '07. And it started with the housing crisis. You've already heard that housing is down. People can't sell their house, maybe your own families. The reason for that right now is the economy. And when people can't sell housing, housing is the key food chain to the American economy. It is the beginning of the food chain of the American economy. And if housing doesn't do well, nothing else works, and a lot of things stop. And as people saw the value of their houses going lower and lower in value, some of them just stopped paying their mortgage because they had borrowed off that house. When you borrow money off a house and the equity in the house goes down, it gets to a point where you say, you know, I don't have any real money left in this house. I'm going to walk away from it. And when they walked away from their mortgage and went into default, that hurt not only them and their credit rating for the rest of their lives, but it hurt the people that sold them the mortgages. A lot of mortgage companies obviously are now in business. And then it just cascaded. It cascaded from people who sold mortgages. It cascaded to brokerage firms who bought those mortgages. So how do you know it's a crisis? Well, you can look at the price of those that are involved. Who are the most involved? Well, the banks are the most involved. Why? Because they held the mortgages. Okay? And if people walk away from the mortgages, those mortgages are now worth less. So the banks thought they had a $1,000 mortgage, now find out they have a $300 mortgage. And that's made their stock depressed. How much? Stocks are down in that area of the market 60, 70, 80%. Now, from that crisis, I put add to the problem. The problem gets more intense because we've got more pressure in other areas of the market. The price of gas, the price of oil, the price of milk. Now all of a sudden inflation starts raising its head. Inflation in a simple term. I try to think of a simple way to explain inflation to you. Milk costs $4 today when you go into a Safeway to buy a gallon. If inflation is just 3% a year in your lifetime, which it will be, in 25 years, that gallon of milk is going to cost $12. So all of these things kept going on, building and building and building. And now it's starting to hurt people. Because people have jobs. They're connected to these things.